Well, thank you for being here this morning. Today we will have introduced in the Senate for the first time Senate Bill 346, which we believe will be one of the biggest rewrites in property tax assessment and appeals in the state, that I'm aware of. And all of this, of course, is predicated on the amazing downturn in the real estate market over the last couple of years. I don't know that we would be dealing with this if we didn't have this downturn. As I have studied the property tax system in Georgia the last couple of years, I came to the conclusion early on it is a tax system that at some point we simply need to get away from. It is the only tax system I know of where you have one person coming out looking at somebody else's property to determine what the value is, and then if the person doesn't like that value, they have to go back through the government/court process to try to fix it. It's just really a cumbersome, unfair tax system that has no real transparency to it. The biggest frustration that taxpayers have is an inability to understand how their property tax bill was derived, and of course they'll complain about the person's house down the street that was $30,000 less, and these type of occurrences are of course happening more and more now that we have a downturn in the economy and people are really concerned about their property tax bill. So we decided that short of getting rid of the tax system altogether, the property tax system altogether, we at least needed to look at the assessment process, see if we could fix that, and the appeals process and see if we could fix that. So in Senate Bill 346, we have, at this point, some 40 changes. And most of them are non-controversial. I will tell you that we have met with the assessors, we have met with property tax attorneys, we have met with the cities, we have met with the counties, and they are all actually in my office right now going over this bill, literally line by line. It will be a very lengthy process. We have not shut anybody out of this process. All the cards are on the table. We want to be as open as we possibly can. But we want to find the problems in the property tax system and root them out and fix them. We also want to change the scope of the property tax system. It seems now almost every portion of it is weighted against the taxpayer, and we want to change that balance. We want to move that so that the taxpayer has a fair shake when they decide to look at their assessment and appeal their assessment. So some of the things we're looking at, and I can't guarantee you that all this will remain in the bill, but year-long property assessment appeals. If a property value is wrong, there should not be a deadline on your ability to appeal that. If it's wrong, it's wrong. It should be corrected. Another thing we're looking at is that every property owner would receive a notice of assessment every year. This is extremely important because without that notice of assessment, you have no right to appeal. Cherokee County, my home county, does do that, so we know it can be done. But every property owner in Cherokee County gets a notice of assessment every year. If you live in a county where you don't get that notice of assessment because the value was not changed by the assessor, you have no right to appeal. And that is really at the crux of so much of the frustration right now, because the way the system works is that if you don't receive a notice of assessment and then you get because the county decided not to lower your value, and then you get your tax bill and you look at it and you say, wait a minute, that's too much, and you call the county and say, I want to appeal this, you have no right. That's why the notice of assessment is extremely important. We need uniformity in assessment notices and appeals forms across the state. We don't need 159 different assessment notices, 159 different appeals forms. That ought to be uniform. Part of this process is trying to take out the human element that goes into any determination of value. One of the things we're saying is, look, if you buy a home this year and you don't do anything to it, when the next tax bill comes out, whatever you paid for it, what the market determined you paid for it, that ought to be the maximum assessed value for the next year. That way it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. What we're seeing are people buying homes for $40,000 and $50,000 in a down market and then getting an assessment notice the next year that says it's worth $150,000. Well, clearly that's wrong, and that needs to be done away with. One of the situations that the counties have run into is allowing payments to be done in different increments, payments to be done early. Some counties would like to actually offer a discount to taxpayers who may want to pay their tax bill early, and we think that ought to be allowed. We also think that taxpayers ought to be allowed to pay off in monthly installments if the county would like, but giving the county flexibility to accept those payments as opposed to one single payment at one single time. We need to look at the commercial process. We have county boards of equalization who are sometimes good at looking at residential homes and determining the value of a $200,000 home, but what they may not be too good at because they haven't had the training or the experience is understanding what a $3 or $4 million commercial piece of property is worth. And what typically happens is someone will appeal, and if they lose at the Board of Equalization, they'll of course take it to the Superior Court. The Superior Court will then hire a professional appraiser to come in and determine the value. Well, instead of going through that process, we're just simply saying that counties ought to make available that professional appraiser to begin with, and let the appraiser on some of these large commercial projects determine what the value is. We've got to establish some time limits for assessor actions. One of the problems we have are people will make an appeal and then they don't get a timely hearing. They don't get to go before the Board of Equalization. They don't get responses from the assessors, and those type of things are just completely unacceptable. During the process of looking at where this went through our study committee, we had people come in and say that certain counties are using all sorts of strange types of processes to determine value, one of them being a view factor. Well, what I view something to be worth and what somebody else views something to be worth could be completely different. The market will always determine what that value is. You don't need somebody coming out and say they think the view's pretty on a sunny day and ugly on an overcast day. I mean, those type of things shouldn't be part of the assessment process. The market will actually determine, and comparable sales will determine. And then finally, one of the things we'd like to see happen is that if a taxpayer appeals their assessment and it goes before the Board of Equalization, we think that the vote of the Board of Equalization to increase the value on that assessment ought to be unanimous. We think that's one of the areas where we need to swing the balance back to the taxpayer. So if your assessment is going to go up through the appeals process, the Board of Equalization ought to think it's unanimous among those three people as opposed to just 2 out of 3. So those are just some of the highlights. There's many, many more changes. This will be a very lengthy process and a very lengthy bill, frankly. As it stands right now, I think 46, 47 pages long. I don't know that there's a lot of controversy in any of these things, but altogether it gives us a much more balanced approach, and it gives the taxpayer a fair shake, which is what we're looking at. Now, I have with me today John O'Callahan. He's president and CEO of the Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership, and his organization has done just incredible work looking at areas, particularly in metro Atlanta, we've had high foreclosure rates, and what are the actual sales values of these houses being sold for, and what is the assessed value. And he has released a report, and if I don't know how many copies you can make available, but in this one right here, this green report, you look through here and there's zip codes in Fulton County where, well, zip code 30315, based on the sales price and the assessed price, the average taxpayer is paying $1,904 more than they ought to actually be paying in property tax in 1 year. That is major. That is something that absolutely must be fixed. So I want to bring John up here and talk about his report, because the work he's done is really at the basis of why this issue is so important.